1912. A mother held her baby for a photo, but then they noticed the eyes of the doll in her hand. In the spring of 1912, a young mother named Clara Whitmore sat quietly in the corner of photographer Theodore Hartwell's studio, her 8-month-old daughter, Emma, nestled in her arms. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting gentle shadows across the modest room filled with velvet drapes and ornate furniture, typical of the era's portrait studios. Clara had dressed Emma in her finest white christening gown, complete with delicate lace trim that had been passed down through 3 generations of Whitmore women. In Emma's tiny hands was clutched a porcelain doll, no more than 6 inches tall, with painted rosy cheeks and golden ringlets carefully sculpted into its ceramic head. The scene appeared utterly ordinary, a snapshot of Edwardian family life frozen in time. Yet, when Hartwell developed the glass plate negative in his darkroom later that evening, he discovered something that would haunt the Whitmore family for generations to come. The doll's eyes, which had appeared vacant and glassy during the sitting, now seemed to stare directly at the camera with an unsettlingly human expression, as if some invisible force had breathed life into the inanimate object during the brief moment of exposure. Clara Whitmore had arrived at Hartwell's studio on Maple Street that Tuesday afternoon with little fanfare. She was a woman of modest means, the wife of a mill worker, and this portrait session represented a significant expense for the young family. Her husband, Thomas, had finally saved enough to commemorate their daughter's first year of life, a common practice among families who could afford such luxuries. The baby had been fussy that morning, but Clara had managed to calm her with a small porcelain doll that had been a gift from her own mother. Theodore Hartwell was known throughout the small Massachusetts town of Millbrook as a meticulous craftsman. He had learned his trade in Boston before establishing his studio in 1908, and his reputation for capturing the subtle expressions and personalities of his subjects had made him the preferred photographer for the town's more affluent families. On this particular day, he found Clara and Emma to be pleasant subjects. The mother's gentle demeanor and the baby's curious eyes made for what he expected would be a charming family portrait. The sitting itself lasted no more than 20 minutes. Hartwell positioned Clara near the window, adjusting her posture to catch the natural light. Emma sat contentedly in her mother's lap, occasionally reaching for the doll with chubby fingers. The photographer made several exposures, each requiring Emma to remain perfectly still for several seconds while the glass plate captured their image. Throughout the session, the porcelain doll remained a constant presence, its painted features unchanging, its glass eyes reflecting the ambient light with the dull sheen, typical of such toys. When Hartwell retreated to his darkroom that evening to develop the plates, he followed his usual routine with practiced precision. The chemical baths, the careful timing, the gradual emergence of images from the treated glass, all proceeded normally until he examined the final result under his magnifying glass. What he saw made him pause, then look again, more carefully. The doll's eyes, which he remembered as vacant and lifeless, now appeared to be looking directly at the camera with an intensity that seemed impossible for an inanimate object. At first, Hartwell attributed the anomaly to a trick of the light, or perhaps a flaw in the photographic plate. He had seen similar effects before, shadows that created the illusion of movement, reflections that seemed to add depth where none existed. But as he studied the image more closely, he realized this was different. The expression in the doll's eyes was too deliberate, too focused to be explained away as a simple photographic artifact. There was something almost human about the way those painted features seemed to engage with the viewer. Despite his unease, Hartwell decided to deliver the photograph to the Whitmore family as planned. When Clara saw the portrait, she was initially delighted with the way it captured Emma's innocent beauty. It was only later, when she showed the photograph to her sister Margaret, that the strange detail was noticed. Margaret pointed to the doll and remarked how lifelike its expression appeared, how the eyes seemed to follow whoever was looking at the picture. Clara had dismissed the observation at first, but as days turned to weeks, she found herself increasingly uncomfortable with the image. Years passed, and the photograph remained in the Whitmore family collection, tucked away in albums and occasionally brought out for family gatherings. Clara would sometimes mention this strange detail to visitors, always with a nervous laugh that suggested the topic made her uncomfortable. Thomas preferred not to discuss it at all, dismissing his wife's concerns as feminine superstition. Emma grew up hearing the story, but paid little attention to what she considered an old family legend. It wasn't until 1964, more than 50 years after the photograph was taken, that Emma's own daughter, Patricia Whitmore Chen, discovered the original glass plate negative while cleaning out her grandmother Clara's attic after the elderly woman's passing. Patricia, now a teacher with a keen interest in family history, was fascinated by the collection of old photographs and documents she found stored in a cedar trunk. The glass plate negative was wrapped in brown paper and accompanied by a note in Clara's handwriting that simply read, "The Doll's Eyes, T. Hartwell, 1912. Intrigued by her grandmother's cryptic notation and the family stories she half remembered from childhood, Patricia decided to have the negative professionally examined. She contacted Dr. Eleanor Fitzgerald, a curator at the New England Historical Society, who specialized in photographic archives from the early 20th century. Dr. Fitzgerald was initially skeptical when Patricia described the supposed anomaly, but she agreed to examine both the negative and a modern print made from it. During their first meeting at the museum, Dr. Fitzgerald offered several rational explanations for the phenomenon Patricia described. Early photographic processes were notoriously unpredictable, she explained, and glass plate negatives were particularly susceptible to various forms of distortion. Light could reflect off surfaces in unexpected ways, creating the illusion of expression where none existed. Chemical reactions during development could alter the appearance of details, making shadows seem deeper or highlights more pronounced. She showed Patricia examples from the museum's collection, photographs where similar effects had created ghostly faces in windows, figures that appeared to move between frames, and objects that seemed to possess an unnatural vitality. But Patricia was not satisfied with these explanations. She had examined the photograph under various lighting conditions and had even commissioned high-resolution digital scans of the original negative. In every iteration, the doll's expression remained consistent and unnaturally lifelike. The eyes appeared to track the viewer with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a painted ceramic face. More troubling still, the anomaly seemed to affect the entire mood of the photograph, transforming what should have been a sweet family portrait into something subtly menacing. Determined to understand the mystery, Patricia and Dr. Fitzgerald began researching the historical context surrounding the photograph. They combed through local newspaper archives from 1912, searching for any events that might provide clues about the unusual image. Their persistence paid off when they discovered a series of articles from the Millbrook Weekly Gazette describing the disappearance of a 7-year-old girl named Susanna Morris in March of that year, just weeks before the Whitmore photograph was taken. According to the newspaper reports, Susanna had vanished from her family's farm on a Tuesday evening after helping with chores. Her parents initially believed she had run away following a scolding for breaking her mother's favorite teacup, but as days passed without any trace of the child, the community began to fear something more sinister had occurred. Search parties combed the surrounding woods and fields, but no evidence of Susanna's fate was ever found. The case remained open for several months before being quietly abandoned as the trail grew cold. What caught Patricia's attention was a detail mentioned in one of the later articles. Susanna Morris had been inseparable from a porcelain doll that her grandfather had brought back from a trip to Germany. The doll was described as having golden ringlets and painted rosy cheeks, matching almost exactly the toy clutched in baby Emma's hands in the 1912 photograph. The article noted that the doll had disappeared along with Susanna, leading investigators to assume she had taken it with her when she fled. This discovery prompted Patricia to search more thoroughly through her grandmother's papers. In a leather-bound journal dating from 1918, she found an entry that changed everything she thought she knew about the family photograph. Clara had written about a recurring dream that had plagued her for years after Emma's portrait was taken. In the dream, she found herself back in Hartwell's studio, but instead of her own daughter, she was holding a different child, a girl with dark hair and frightened eyes who kept whispering about wanting to go home. The journal entry continued with Clara's description of a growing unease about Emma's doll, the same one featured in the photograph. She wrote about how the toy seemed to move on its own, never quite where she remembered leaving it. Emma would wake from naps claiming the doll had been talking to her, telling stories about a girl who lived in the woods and couldn't find her way back to her parents. Clara had initially dismissed these as a child's imagination, but the frequency and consistency of the stories began to trouble her. Most unsettling of all was Clara's account of the day she finally decided to dispose of the doll. She had wrapped it in cloth and buried it in the garden behind their house, hoping to end what she had come to believe was some form of supernatural influence. But the next morning, Emma woke up clutching the doll, its ceramic surface clean despite having been buried in dirt. When Clara asked her daughter how she had retrieved the toy, Emma simply said that the sad girl had brought it back because she didn't want to be alone. The final entry in Clara's journal, dated December 1918, revealed her ultimate conclusion about the mysterious photograph. She had come to believe that the doll in the picture was not merely reflecting light in an unusual way, but was somehow serving as a conduit for the spirit of Susanna Morris, the missing child whose own doll had never been found. Clara wrote that she could feel the presence of the lost girl whenever she looked at the photograph, as if Susanna was trying to communicate her location or perhaps simply seeking acknowledgement of her existence. Patricia shared these discoveries with Dr. Fitzgerald, who found herself reconsidering her initial skepticism. While she could not accept a supernatural explanation for the photograph's anomaly, she acknowledged that the coincidences were remarkable. The similarity between the described missing child's doll and the one in the photograph, combined with Clara's detailed accounts of unexplained phenomena, created a compelling narrative that transcended simple photographic error. Together, they developed a theory that, while unprovable, offered a possible explanation for the strange image. Perhaps the doll in the Whitmore photograph was indeed the same one that had belonged to Susanna Morris. If the child had met with foul play somewhere near the Whitmore property, it was conceivable that her doll had been found and given to Emma by someone who was unaware of its history. The expression captured in the photograph might then represent not supernatural activity, but rather the psychological projection of guilt or unease by those who knew or suspected the doll's tragic origins. This theory, gained additional weight when Patricia discovered a land record showing that the Morris farm had shared a property line with land owned by Thomas Whitmore's brother. The families would have known each other, and it was entirely possible that the doll had found its way to the Whitmores through some connection that had been forgotten or deliberately obscured over time. Dr. Fitzgerald proposed displaying the photograph as part of an exhibition on unexplained historical phenomena, framing it not as evidence of paranormal activity, but as an example of how communities process unresolved trauma through folklore and legend. The image would be presented alongside Clara's journal entries and the newspaper articles about Susanna Morris, allowing visitors to draw their own conclusions about the relationship between historical fact and supernatural belief. Patricia agreed to donate the materials to the museum, feeling that her grandmother's long-held secret deserved a wider audience. The exhibition opened in October 1965, 53 years after Theodore Hartwell first noticed the anomaly in his darkroom. Visitors came to see the photograph that had sparked decades of family unease, studying the doll's painted features for signs of the impossible expression that had troubled the Whitmores for so long. Some saw nothing more than tricks of light and shadow, the inevitable result of primitive photographic techniques applied to reflective surfaces. Others claimed they could indeed detect something unsettling in the doll's gaze, a depth of expression that seemed to transcend the limitations of painted ceramic game. A few visitors reported feeling uncomfortable while viewing the image, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The truth behind the 1912 photograph remains elusive, lost somewhere between documented history and family legend. Susanna Morris was never found, her fate joining the countless unsolved mysteries that populate every community's past. The doll that may or may not have been hers disappeared after Clara's death, its whereabouts unknown to this day. Theodore Hartwell's studio was demolished in 1945, taking with it any equipment that might have provided clues about the photographic techniques that created the anomaly. What endures is the image itself, a testament to the power of unexplained details to transform ordinary moments into sources of enduring mystery. In the eyes of a porcelain doll, caught by chance or design in a moment of impossible expression, we see reflected our deepest anxieties about the nature of life and death, presence and absence, memory and forgetting. The photograph serves as a reminder that some questions resist easy answers, and that the most compelling mysteries are often found not in distant lands or ancient times, but in the familiar objects and forgotten stories that surround us every day. Whether the doll's eyes truly held the spirit of a lost child, or simply reflected the fears and hopes of those who gazed upon them, the 1912 photograph of Clara and Emma Whitmore continues to challenge our understanding of what is possible within the bounds of rational explanation. In its silent testimony to events that may never be fully understood, it stands as a monument to all the children who have disappeared without trace, leaving behind only questions, grief, and the fading hope that somewhere, somehow, they might still be trying to find their way home.